The flashbulbs were a volley of silent, white-hot explosions. They illuminated the grand stage of the Metropolitan Gala, freezing the moment in time. Richard Davenport, the titan of New York real estate, a man whose profile was second only to the skyline itself, leaned in. He wasn't leaning toward his wife. He was leaning toward his young, radiant protégée, Serafina Sinclair. And then he kissed her. It wasn't a chaste peck. It was a deep, possessive, public claim, delivered to 1,000 cameras. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, was stolen by the clicking shutters. And in the front row, his wife, Elena, just sat there, her face a pale, beautiful mask, watching her world detonate. The air in the plaza's grand ballroom was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. It was the annual Vanguard Gala, the absolute pinnacle of New York's philanthropic calendar. To be here, you hadn't just arrived. You were the destination. And at the center of this glittering universe, at the head table, sat Richard and Eleanor Davenport. Richard was a man carved from ambition and tailored by Savile Row. His charisma was a tangible force, a gravity well that pulled everyone, investors, politicians, and beautiful women, into his orbit. He was laughing, a deep, confident sound, his hand resting on the shoulder of Julian Vanderbilt, the banking heir. "The Legacy Tower isn't just a building, Julian," Richard boomed, his voice carrying. "It's a statement. It's my statement to this city." Elena watched him. She had watched him for 12 years. She was the perfect accessory, poured into a deep emerald silk gown that Richard's personal shopper had selected. It was demure and appropriate. Her chestnut hair was swept into a chignon, so tight it gave her a mild headache. She was the quiet wife, the mystery, the one the gossip columnists at the Post described as elegant but forgettable. They had no idea. She shifted in her seat, the silk whispering against the velvet chair. Her stomach was in a cold, tight knot. This feeling had been her constant companion for 6 months, ever since Serafina Sinclair had joined Davenport Innovations. Serafina was everything Eleanor was not. She was blonde, dazzlingly bright, and barely 25. She had been hired as a brand strategist, a vague title that seemed to involve being photographed at Richard's side at every possible opportunity. Tonight, she was seated just 2 seats away, radiant in a crimson dress that left nothing to the imagination. And Richard's eyes, even when he was speaking to Vanderbilt, kept finding her. "Elena, darling," a voice purred beside her. It was Genevieve Beaumont, a society dragon whose husband ran a rival firm. "You look composed. Richard is certainly in high spirits tonight. That new girl, Serafina. Such ambition. She reminds me of a young Richard." The veiled insult landed as intended. Elena forced a small, tight smile. "Richard has always valued ambition, Genevieve. It's what built his empire." "Oh, his empire, of course," Genevieve replied, her eyes glinting. "How wonderful it must be to be so supported." Elena merely sipped her water. The crystal was heavy and cold against her lips. She knew what they all thought, that she was a nobody, a quiet, mousy woman he'd married before he became the Richard Davenport. They thought she clung to him, a beneficiary of his genius. The truth was a heavy, cold secret she'd held for over a decade. Her gaze drifted back to her husband. He was leaning in to hear something Serafina was saying, his head bent low, their proximity intimate and shocking in its casualness. Serafina laughed, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his forearm. It lingered there. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't just the whispers. It wasn't just the late nights he'd written off as strategy sessions. It was this, the sheer, brazen arrogance of it. Doing this here, in front of Julian Vanderbilt, in front of Genevieve Beaumont, in front of her. A waiter appeared, silent as a phantom, to clear her untouched appetizer plate. She watched him, an anonymous man doing his job, and felt a sudden, sharp pang of envy. The anonymity. The freedom. Richard finally stood, tapping his glass for attention. The room, a sea of diamonds and black ties, slowly quieted. Friends, colleagues, visionaries, he began, his voice amplified by the microphone. He owned the room as he owned everything. Tonight, we celebrate not just philanthropy, but progress. We celebrate the future. Davenport Innovations is proud to announce our new charitable foundation, a $1 billion pledge to reshape the skyline of opportunity for this city's youth. Polite, then thunderous applause. Elena clapped, her hand stinging. She knew this foundation. It had been her idea, a way to channel their immense wealth. He had dismissed it 3 months ago as sentimental nonsense. This company, Richard continued, was built from nothing, from an idea I had in a tiny downtown apartment. It was built on grit, on vision, and on an unrelenting refusal to accept no. Elena's headache tightened. His idea. His grit. She felt the sudden, metallic taste of bitterness in her mouth. She thought of her father, a quiet man who had built Thornton Industrial, a manufacturing empire in the Midwest. A man who had died too young, leaving his 22-year-old daughter, an art history major, with a fortune so vast it terrified her. A fortune she had learned to manage, to grow, and, most importantly, to hide. But no man builds alone, Richard said, smiling that $1 million smile. You need a team. You need people who share the vision. People who aren't afraid to push boundaries. This was it. Elena knew what was coming. He would thank his COO, Harrison Montgomery, an old friend of her father's, and the only other person in this room who knew the truth. He would thank the board. He might, if she was lucky, give her a cursory nod. And in the last year, Richard said, his voice softening, I've been lucky enough to find a new kind of visionary, someone who has inspired me, re-energized me, someone who understands what it means to truly build a legacy. He turned, his arm outstretched, not toward his COO, not toward the board, and certainly not toward his wife. Please join me in welcoming the new face of the Davenport Foundation and the future of our brand, Serafina Sinclair. The room was stunned into momentary silence. This was not just an announcement. It was a coronation. Serafina Sinclair rose from her seat, a picture of feigned humility that fooled no one. The crimson dress seemed to glow under the spotlight that found her instantly. She walked to the stage, not like an employee, but like a queen claiming her throne. Richard took her hand, pulling her to the center. Serafina, he said, his voice full of an emotion that was sickeningly genuine, has shown me what true passion looks like. Eleanor watched, immobile. The ballroom, with its 500 guests, had ceased to exist. There was only the stage, a brightly lit tableau of her humiliation. She could feel Genevieve Beaumont's gaze on her, sharp as a physical jab. She could feel Harrison Montgomery, seated further down, radiating a silent, furious energy in her direction. And so, Richard declared, his arm wrapping around Serafina's waist, I want to seal this new partnership, this new vision. He was high on the applause, on the power, on the sheer audacity of his own betrayal. He looked at Serafina, who gazed up at him with undisguised adoration. And then he'd leaned in. The kiss. It was the pop, pop, pop of the flashbulbs that broke the spell. A dozen photographers from The Times, The Post, and Vanity Fair had rushed the stage, their lenses capturing the moment that would be on every front page tomorrow. He publicly kissed Mistress at Gala. Richard didn't seem to care. He held the kiss, deepening it, a flagrant act of dominance. Serafina melted into him, her hand coming up to cup his jaw. In the front row, Elena Davenport finally moved. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't throw her glass of water, which was the only thing she truly wanted to do. Instead, she placed her linen napkin, folded neatly, beside her plate. She felt a strange, cold calm settle over her. It was the calm of a surgeon who has just seen the X-ray and knows with absolute certainty that the limb cannot be saved. The only option left is amputation. The applause that followed was scattered, confused, and nervous. Richard, finally breaking the kiss, held Serafina's hand aloft like a trophy. "The future, ladies and gentlemen!" he shouted. He turned, beaming, and his eyes finally found his wife. He was expecting... what? Tears? A supportive, pained smile? He saw neither. Elena met his gaze across the crowded room. Her expression was utterly blank. It was an emptiness so profound it was more terrifying than rage. She held his gaze for 1, 2, 3 seconds. Then, in a single, fluid motion, she stood up. She didn't run. She didn't storm out. She turned her back to the stage, to her husband, and to the life she had tolerated. She began to walk, her posture perfect, her steps even and unhurried, through the sea of shocked and whispering faces. She walked past Julian Vanderbilt, who looked utterly bewildered. She walked past Genevieve Beaumont, whose jaw was, for the first time in memory, hanging open. Richard's smile faltered. His triumphant expression curdled into confusion, then a flash of anger. "Elena?" he called out, his voice, for the first time, uncertain over the microphone. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. She pushed open the grand ballroom doors, the sound of her husband's voice, and the shocked murmurs of New York society muffled as the heavy oak closed softly, definitively, behind her. Outside, in the gilded hallway, the air was blessedly cool. She took her first deep breath of the night. It felt like her lungs were expanding for the first time in a decade. Her hand, which had been perfectly steady, began to shake. She pulled her phone from her clutch. Not to call a car, not to call a lawyer. Not yet. She had one call to make. She found the number and pressed it. It rang once. "Harrison," she said, her voice low and clear, though the tremors were now rattling her body. He did it. He really did it. There was a heavy sigh on the other end. "I saw Elena. I'm right behind you. What's the protocol?" "The protocol is scorched earth," Elena replied, the coldness returning, freezing the tremors in her voice. "Call Alistair. Tell him to liquidate my personal holdings in the Cayman Fund. I want the liquidity by morning. And schedule the emergency board meeting. 10 a.m., Monday. It's time they finally meet the real investor." To understand how a woman like Eleanor could be so thoroughly erased from her own life, one had to understand the Thorntons. The Thorntons were not like the Vanderbilts or the Rockefellers. They were not new money like Richard. They were quiet, Midwest, industrial money. They made the steel that built the skyscrapers, the turbines that powered the cities. They didn't put their names on opera houses. They put them on ball bearings and circuit boards. Arthur Thornton, Elena's father, had despised the ostentatious flash of New York society. He had raised his daughter to be smart, meticulous, and, above all, invisible. "The loudest man in the room, Ellie," he used to say, "is always the weakest. True power doesn't need to announce itself." When he died of a sudden aneurysm, 22-year-old Elena, then an art history student at Columbia, inherited the entirety of Thornton Industrial and its labyrinthine trust valued at just over $4 billion. She was terrified. She was lost. And then, 6 months later, she met Richard Davenport. He was a struggling architect, brilliant and ravenous with ambition. He had designs for buildings that defied gravity, but not a dollar to his name. He was dazzling. He didn't know who she was. To him, she was just Ellie Thornton, a quiet student who worked part-time at the university library. She fell in love, not with his charm, but with his drive. He saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. He was the architect. She believed, could be the silent benefactor. She wanted him to love her, not the Thornton fortune. So she made a plan. Using her father's ancient, frighteningly loyal lawyer, Alistair Finch, she created a ghost. They established Aegis Holdings, a private equity firm based in Delaware, with its funding routed through a series of offshore accounts. It was impenetrable. The sole director and beneficiary was listed as E.A. Thornton, a name that meant nothing to the financial world. Aegis Holdings made its first investment in a promising young architect, Richard Davenport. When he proposed a year later, she was ecstatic. He loved her. He had no idea. She insisted on a prenuptial agreement, which he readily signed, laughing. "I have nothing to protect, Ellie," he'd said, "and I'll be making so much money soon, I'll be the one asking you for a prenup." She had smiled and signed, her $4.2 billion secret safe. For the first few years, it was perfect. He built his first boutique hotel, then his first condo tower. Aegis Holdings was his silent, supportive partner, always approving his, admittedly brilliant proposals. He thought Aegis was a faceless European fund. Elena, meanwhile, played the part of the supportive, modest wife. She managed their homes. She hosted small dinners. And in secret, she ran Aegis. She was the one who greenlit the land purchases. She was the one who analyzed the zoning laws. She was the one who studied the market, channeling her father's meticulous genius into spreadsheets and risk assessments. Richard was the face, the visionary. She was the architect. She was the foundation, the steel, and the bank. Davenport Innovations grew into an empire. Richard became a god in the media, and slowly he began to believe his own press. He forgot the struggling architect. He forgot the small seed fund that had taken a huge risk on him. He believed, with the fanaticism of a true narcissist, that he had done this alone. And as he grew, Eleanor shrank. He began to see her as he saw his first, modest apartment, a relic of his humble past. She was too quiet, too simple. He needed someone who matched his energy. Eleanor saw the change. She saw the new assistants, the late nights, the emotional distance. But she was trapped in the gilded cage she herself had built. If she revealed the truth, that she wasn't just his wife, she was his owner, it would detonate the one thing she'd always wanted. The belief that he had, at some point, loved her and not her money. Harrison Montgomery, her father's old COO, and the only board member at Davenport Innovations she had personally installed as a representative of Aegis Holdings, had warned her. "He's running wild, Elena," Harrison had said a year ago in a secret meeting at his club. "He's leveraging the company's assets on vanity projects. The Legacy Tower is a sinkhole. He's cooking the books on the projections to make it look good. He's ambitious," Elena had defended, weakly. "He's reckless," Harrison countered, "and he's disrespectful. Not just to the board, but to you. You built this. Don't let this peacock burn your father's legacy to the ground." Then came Serafina. Serafina was the final, brutal escalation. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a public replacement. He wasn't just cheating on his wife. He was installing his mistress in the company she owned. When Eleanor walked out of the gala, she wasn't just walking out on her husband. She was walking out on the ghost of Ellie Thornton. The quiet, supportive, invisible wife was gone. Alistair Finch, her lawyer, had been waiting for this call for 5 years. He had the Armageddon files prepared. When Harrison called him from the lobby of the plaza, Alistair's only response was, "It's about damn time." Eleanor spent the night not in her Fifth Avenue penthouse, Richard's penthouse, but in a secure suite at the Carlyle, a hotel her father had always preferred. She didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the lights of the city she owned, and she methodically dismantled her husband's life, one email and one phone call at a time. She transferred the liquidity from the Cayman Fund into a new, primary account under her full legal name, Elena Thornton Davenport. She had Alistair draft the emergency motions. She reviewed the final, devastating audit of the Legacy Tower project, proving Richard had been funneling millions into offshore accounts under Serafina Sinclair's name. She had protected him from his own greed for years, quietly covering his mistakes, redirecting funds to mask his failures. No more. The sun rose over Central Park, and Elena, dressed in a simple, severe black dress, drank her first cup of coffee. It tasted like victory. Richard woke up on Monday morning to a splitting headache and a public relations hurricane. His phone was a nuclear bomb of missed calls and texts. The front page of the New York Post was a full-bleed photo of The Kiss, with the headline, "Richard's riches to rags mistress, Davenport ditches wife in Gala shocker." Vanity Fair had an online piece titled, "The Silent Mrs. Davenport Finally Speaks," by walking out. He was furious, not at himself, but at Eleanor. How dare she? How dare she humiliate him by walking out? She was supposed to be the quiet one. She was supposed to sit there, take it, and then they would have a civilized discussion at home. She had made him look like the villain. He stormed through the penthouse, which was eerily quiet. Her closet was half empty. She hadn't taken the designer clothes. She had taken her simple suits, the ones he hated. "Fine," he yelled to the empty apartment. "Fine. You want to fight, Elena? You have no idea who you're messing with." He was fueled by a blinding, narcissistic rage. He truly believed his own legend. He had built this. Aegis Holdings was just a bank, and banks could be replaced. Elena was his wife, and she would be brought to heel. He got to the offices of Davenport Innovations at 8 a.m., snapping at his secretary. "Get me Serafina, and get me legal." Serafina arrived, looking nervous for the first time. "Richard, the press is everywhere. They're calling my family. They're saying awful things." "Let them talk," Richard spat, pulling her into his office. "This is a power play, that's all. Elena is having a little tantrum. We're going to shut it down, today." "How?" "By cutting her off, and by removing her only ally on the board, Harrison Montgomery." Richard paced, his energy vibrating with malice. "He's always been her little spy. He represents Aegis. I'm going to call an emergency meeting, expose him for financial malfeasance. I'll make something up, who cares, and install you in his seat." "On the board?" Serafina's eyes went wide with greed. "On the board," he confirmed. "Aegis holds 60%, yes, but they are a silent partner. They have never voted against me. They vote with the CEO, that's the deal. My 30% plus the other board members' 10% gives me the majority over Montgomery. He's out. You're in. And when Elena comes crawling back, she'll find her allowance cut, and her friend gone." He was so consumed by his own plan that he barely registered his secretary buzzing in. "Sir, you have an email from the office of Alistair Finch on behalf of Aegis Holdings." "What?" Richard snatched the printout. It was a formal notification. An emergency board meeting had been called for 10 a.m. The agenda item: a full audit and review of the Legacy Tower project, and a vote on the removal of Richard Davenport as CEO. Richard laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. They called my bluff, that old fool Harrison. He thinks he can scare me? He looked at Serafina. He's triggered a war he can't win. Aegis has no standing to remove me. The CEO position is ironclad. He's just embarrassed himself. He tore up the memo. Let's go. I'm going to enjoy firing him to his face. At 9:58 a.m., Richard Davenport strode into the 50th floor boardroom. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, overlooking the city he believed he owned. The board members were already there, a collection of stony-faced men, and one woman, Genevieve Beaumont's sister, who looked terrified. Harrison Montgomery was at one end of the table, looking calm. "Harrison," Richard said, his voice dripping with condescension as he took his seat at the head of the table. "A bold move. Calling a meeting to oust me? Did you forget who I am? Did you forget who signs your checks?" "I know exactly who you are, Richard," Harrison said, his voice even. "And I know exactly who signs the checks. Let's wait for the representative from Aegis Holdings before we begin." Richard scoffed. "Aegis doesn't send reps, they send proxy forms, and they always vote with me. So let's get this over with." The boardroom doors opened. It wasn't a lawyer, it wasn't a banker. It was Eleanor. She was not the woman from the gala. The emerald silk was gone, replaced by a severe, perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit. Her hair was not in a demure chignon. It was pulled back in a tight, powerful ponytail. She carried a leather briefcase. Beside her was a man Richard vaguely recognized, Alistair Finch, a dry-as-dust estate lawyer. Richard's blood ran cold. "Elena, what is this? This is a closed board meeting. You can't be here." Elena didn't look at him. She walked to the empty seat directly opposite him, the one reserved for the primary stakeholder. She sat down. Alistair Finch stood behind her. "Mrs. Davenport," Harrison Montgomery said formally, "thank you for coming on such short notice." "What is going on?" Richard demanded, his voice rising. Elena finally looked at him. Her eyes were not sad or angry. They were the color of steel. "You're right, Richard," she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing in the silent room. "This is a closed board meeting, and I am here representing the majority stakeholder." Richard stared. "You? You're representing Aegis? Did Harrison put you up to this? This is a joke." "Alistair," Elena said simply. The old lawyer stepped forward and began placing a thick, bound document in front of each board member. "Aegis Holdings," Alistair began, his reedy voice cutting through the tension, "is a private equity firm registered in the state of Delaware. It is, and has been for 12 years, the sole funding entity for the corporation known as Davenport Innovations." "We know this," Richard snapped. "Get to the point." Alistair looked at Richard over the top of his spectacles. "Aegis Holdings controls 60% of the voting stock in this company. Its board of directors consists of one person, the sole managing director, and 100% beneficiary of the Thornton Trust, which is Aegis Holdings." He paused, letting the weight of the word settle. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Alistair said, "allow me to formally introduce you to your investor, Mrs. Elena Thornton Davenport." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was so quiet that the sound of a single paper shuffling as Genevieve's sister nervously turned a page was like a gunshot. Richard Davenport's face went through a rapid, grotesque series of transformations. First, blank confusion. Then, a dawning, sickly comprehension. Then, a dark, purple rage. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking. You? Ellie? My name, she stated, is Eleanor, and you will address me as Mrs. Davenport. This is fraud, Richard sputtered, leaping to his feet. You deceived me. You lied to me for 12 years. This is my company. I built this. You built nothing, Eleanor said, her voice slicing through his hysteria. You were an architect with a blueprint. I bought the land. I paid for the steel. I funded the payroll. Davenport Innovations was a wholly owned subsidiary of my company, Richard. A company I allowed you to run, believing you were a partner, not a parasite. She looked away from him, addressing the stunned board. Gentlemen, we are here today because Mr. Davenport has, for the last 2 years, been actively sabotaging this corporation. He has done so by funneling company resources into a personal vanity project, the Legacy Tower, which our independent auditors, she nodded to Alistair, who distributed a second set of documents, have confirmed is currently $1.2 billion over budget and structurally unsound. Harrison Montgomery spoke up. I tried to warn the board. Mr. Davenport provided falsified projections to hide the losses. Furthermore, Elena continued, Mr. Davenport has been misappropriating funds for personal use, specifically the transfer of $3 million to an offshore account in the name of Seraphina Sinclair, his protégé. Genevieve's sister gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. This is slander, Richard roared, slamming his fists on the table. You housewife, you think you can come in here with these lies? They are not lies, Mr. Davenport. Alistair Finch's voice was sharp. We have the wire transfer receipts. We have the bank records. You used company funds to purchase her apartment, her car, and, as of last week, a 2-carat diamond ring. All classified as promotional and marketing expenses. Richard was cornered. He was a predator trapped, and now he turned vicious. You did this, he screamed at Eleanor. You set me up. You let me believe I was in charge, just so you could pull the rug out? What kind of sick game is this? You were jealous. You were jealous of Seraphina. You were jealous of my success. Elena stood up slowly. She was 2 inches shorter than him. But in that moment, she towered over him. I was not jealous of your success, Richard. I was proud of it. I funded it. I celebrated it. I did it all anonymously because I was a fool. I was a fool who believed that you loved me, and that my money would poison that. Her voice was ice. But you didn't need my money to poison you. Your ego did that all on its own. You disrespected me in private for years. I tolerated it. You diminished me. You gaslit me. You made me feel small. I tolerated it. But on Saturday night, you disrespected my father's legacy. You used the company he built to publicly humiliate me and crown your mistress. And that, Richard, that I will not tolerate. She looked at the board. The agenda for this meeting is a vote to remove Richard Davenport as CEO, effective immediately, for gross negligence, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. Harrison, please call the vote. Wait! Richard shrieked, his composure completely shattered. He was sweating through his expensive shirt. You can't! The stock! My 30%, your 30%, Alistair interjected, was not earned, Mr. Davenport. It was a gift of stock from Aegis Holdings. A gift that, per the key man clause in your employment contract, is forfeit upon termination for cause. You, Richard, own nothing. You never did. Richard looked at the faces around the table. They were not his allies. They were investors on a sinking ship, and Eleanor had just thrown them the only life raft. All in favor of the motion to remove Richard Davenport? Harrison asked. Eleanor's hand went up. Harrison's hand went up. Genevieve's sister's hand went up. One by one, every other board member raised their hand. It was unanimous. Richard stared at Elena, his face pale, his eyes wide with a terrifying primal hatred. You witch! You will not get away with this. I will destroy you. I will tell the world what you did. Tell them what, Richard? Elena asked, picking up her briefcase. Tell them I'm not a simple wife? Tell them I'm the one with the money. Please, you'd be doing me a favor. She nodded to the two large security guards who had just appeared at the door. Mr. Davenport is trespassing. Please escort him from my building. The security guards, both imposing men who usually handled union disputes at construction sites, moved toward Richard. Don't you touch me, he bellowed, backing away. This is my office. This is my building. It was never yours, Richard, Harrison Montgomery said, his voice laced with a cold satisfaction he'd held back for a decade. You were just leasing it. Richard, seeing the guards close in, became pathetic. The rage collapsed into a desperate, sniveling plea. He turned to Elena, his eyes wide and suddenly wet. Ellie, please! Don't do this! Think about us! Think about the 12 years! I love you! I've always loved you! Serafina, she was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. It was the pressure. You know the pressure I'm under. Elena watched him, her expression unreadable. She had waited half her life to hear him say he loved her and mean it. And here it was, a desperate lie from a drowning man. The pressure, she repeated, her voice void of emotion. Yes, I know all about the pressure, Richard. The pressure of watching the man you love turn into a monster. The pressure of hiding your own mind so his ego wouldn't be bruised. The pressure of knowing that one word from me could have ended you at any time and not saying it. She shook her head. It's over. Get him out. No, he shrieked as the guards grabbed his arms. You can't. I'll sue. The doors to the boardroom burst open again. This time, it was Serafina. She must have heard the shouting from Richard's office down the hall. Richard, what's going on? Who are these men? She saw Eleanor and her face twisted into a triumphant smirk. Oh, you're here. Did you come to beg him to take you back? It's too late, darling. Richard and I... Shut up, you idiot! Richard roared, struggling against the guards. You have no idea what you've done. Serafina's smirk vanished, replaced by confusion. What? Eleanor looked at the young woman. She felt not anger, just a profound, weary pity. Miss Sinclair, your employment with this company is terminated, effective immediately. Your corporate accounts have been frozen, and the company-leased apartment on Park Avenue will require you to vacate by 5 p.m. today. You can't fire me, Serafina stammered, looking to Richard for help. Richard, tell her. He can't tell me anything, Miss Sinclair, Elena said. Richard doesn't work here anymore. The color drained from Serafina's face as she finally understood. She wasn't the queen. She was the jester. And the show was over. But the foundation, she whispered. The gala. He promised me. He promised you things that were never his to give, Elena said. She turned to the guards. Get them both out. The commotion was swift. Richard, realizing his pleas were useless, returned to rage. He kicked and swore, a stream of vile insults directed at Elena, at Harrison, at her father. You'll be bankrupt in a year, you stupid. The door slammed shut, cutting him off. The 50th floor boardroom was silent once more. Elena let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 12 years. She sank into the chair at the head of the table. Her chair. The board members were all looking at her, a mixture of awe, fear, and profound respect on their faces. "Well," Genevieve's sister said into the silence. "That was thorough." Elena managed a small, tired smile. "My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. I prefer a quieter style of management. This was an unfortunate but necessary piece of house cleaning." Harrison Montgomery cleared his throat. "The motion carries. Richard Davenport is removed. That leaves the seat of CEO and chairman vacant." He looked at Eleanor. "The board is prepared to accept nominations." Alistair Finch stepped forward. "I nominate Eleanor Thornton Davenport as interim CEO and permanent chairwoman of the board." "Seconded," Harrison said instantly. "All in favour?" Every hand went up. "It's settled then," Harrison said. "Congratulations, Madam Chairwoman." Eleanor looked out the window. The city skyline, her skyline, stretched out before her. The Legacy Tower, half built and shrouded in scaffolding, was a testament to her husband's ego. "Thank you," she said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to call our head of demolition. It's time to tear that building down to the steel and start over. The right way." 3 months later, the sign outside the building didn't say Davenport Innovations. It said simply Thornton Group. The 50th floor office, once a cavern of dark mahogany, black leather, and self-congratulatory portraits of Richard, was now unrecognizable. Elena had gutted it. It was now open, airy, and filled with light, glass, and blueprints for projects that were innovative, sustainable, and above all, profitable. The Legacy Tower scandal had been brutal. The press had a field day with the jilted wife's revenge. Richard, true to his word, had tried to destroy her. He gave scathing interviews, painting her as a manipulative, cold-hearted puppeteer. It backfired, spectacularly. When Alistair Finch, on behalf of the Thornton Group, released the full forensic audit, the embezzlement, the fraud, the offshore accounts in Seraphina's name, the narrative shifted. Richard wasn't a victim. He was a con man. Seraphina was a laughing stock. Richard was now drowning in lawsuits, not just from the board, but from contractors, lenders, and the SEC. His 30% of the stock was worthless, reabsorbed by the company. He had lost everything. The last Elena had heard, he was living in a rented condo in New Jersey, desperately trying to find a law firm that would take his case. Elena, meanwhile, had become a legend. The silent Mrs. Davenport was silent no more. She was the matriarch of Manhattan, the Thornton Titan. Forbes had put her on the cover, detailing the story of the hidden billion-dollar fortune and the woman who had run an empire from her living room. She sat at her new desk, signing off on the final plans for the salvage tower project. It was being redesigned as a mixed-income housing and green tech incubator. It was a project her father would have been proud of. Harrison Montgomery, now her official COO, knocked and entered. "Madam Chairwoman, the divorce papers. The final decree just came through from the judge." He placed the document on her desk. She looked at it. Davenport versus Davenport. It was done. She was, in the eyes of the law and the world, entirely her own person. "Thank you, Harrison," she said, signing the acknowledgement. "He's contesting the prenup, of course," Harrison said. "He's claiming emotional distress and coercion." Elena laughed. It was a real, genuine laugh. "Let him. Alistair will have fun with that. Send him a check for $1 for services rendered." "Services?" "For 12 years, Elena said. "He was my shadow. He taught me exactly what not to be." "That's worth something." Harrison smiled. "Well, the new architects are here for the 2 p.m. meeting, and Genevieve Beaumont is in the lobby. She's chairing the new foundation committee and wanted to, personally, go over the Gala plans with you." "Send her in, please," Elena said. Genevieve, once her society tormentor, entered the office, her eyes wide. Elena, this room, it's stunning. I like the light, Elena said simply, standing to greet her. We all do, Genevieve said, her voice tinged with a new, genuine respect. We all do. After the meeting, Elena stood alone by the window. She thought back to that night at the gala. The humiliation, the cold knot of fear, the flashbulbs. She had walked into that ballroom as Richard Davenport's wife, an accessory, a ghost. She walked out as Eleanor Thornton. She hadn't wanted this fight. She had never wanted the spotlight. She had only wanted a partner. But Richard, in his infinite arrogance, had given her something else. He had tried to break her. Instead, he had set her free. She looked down at the city. It wasn't just a skyline. It was a canvas. And for the first time in her life, she was holding the brush. She was no longer the silent investor. She was, and always had been, the architect. 6 months after the boardroom coup, the New York winter was giving way to a raw, wet spring. The air at 5:30 a.m. was cold enough to bite, carrying the metallic tang of damp steel and diesel. Elena Thornton Davenport stood on a plywood platform, 4 stories above the ground, looking down into the excavated heart of what had been Richard's legacy tower. The name was gone. The monument to his ego, which had been a half-built skeleton of financial ruin, had been systematically dismantled. Now it was simply the Thornton Commons. She was wearing not a couture gown, but fleece-lined work pants, steel-toed boots caked in mud, and a white hard hat with the simple Thornton logo on the side. Beside her stood Sal Rizzoli, the site foreman, a grizzled bear of a man who had worked on every major skyscraper built in the city for 30 years. He'd been openly skeptical of her. The wind shear report came in for the upper terraces, Sal said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He pointed to a section of the blueprint unrolled on a makeshift table. The engineers at Arup say we need to reinforce the glass panels with a 30mm laminate. That's another $2 million, and it puts us 2 weeks behind. Elena didn't look at the cost analysis. She looked at the raw engineering data. She traced the lines of the wind flow diagram, her gloved finger stopping on an azimuth calculation. They're compensating for the downdraft from one Vanderbilt, she said, her voice clear in the morning quiet. But they didn't account for the Venturi effect from the new J.P. Morgan Tower. The wind is going to accelerate between the buildings, not just flow around them. Look at this. She pulled a red marker from her pocket and drew 2 new arrows on the plan. The pressure won't be on the face of the glass. It'll be on the mounting bolts. A 30mm laminate won't matter if the entire panel is ripped from the anchoring. Sal stared at the drawing, his bushy eyebrows climbing his forehead. He ran the numbers in his head, his lips moving silently. Holy hell, he breathed, looking at her with a completely new expression. You're right. We don't need thicker glass. We need a flexible mounting system. It would be cheaper, too. Have the structural team model a baffle joint system, Elena said, rolling up the blueprint. I want the new specs on my desk by noon. She handed him the plans and turned, her gaze sweeping over the massive site. Below, the first shift of iron workers was arriving, their headlamps cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. You're here every morning, Mrs. Davenport, Sal said, his tone no longer skeptical, but respectful. Davenport, the other one. He came here once, for a press photo. He wore alligator shoes. He liked the idea of building, Sal, Elena said, watching the sparks from a welder's torch dance below. I like the work. She left the site as the sun was beginning to touch the highest spires of the city. Her father had taught her that you couldn't own something you didn't understand, from the foundation to the balance sheet. Richard had only ever understood the balance sheet, and even then, only the parts he could twist to his advantage. When she arrived at the Thornton Group's headquarters, her assistant, a sharp young woman named Claire, met her at the elevator. "Good morning, Madam Chairwoman. Your 9 a.m. with the new architectural leads is confirmed. The 11 a.m. is with Alistair Finch regarding the final asset seizure from Mr. Davenport's remaining accounts. And there is an unscheduled matter." "What is it?" Elena asked, shedding her heavy coat. "A woman is in the lobby. She says her name is Seraphina Sinclair. She refuses to leave. She says she will wait all day. She looks—" Claire hesitated. "She looks unwell." Elena paused, her hand on her office door. The name was a jolt, a ghost from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The crimson dress, the triumphant smile, the kiss that had shattered her world and, paradoxically, rebuilt it. She felt a flash of the old, cold anger. Her first instinct was to have security remove her. It would be just. But Eleanor was no longer the woman ruled by instinct and injury. She was the woman who checked the engineering. 5 minutes, Elena said. "Send her in, and then call security to wait on the floor. And Claire, bring 2 coffees, 1 black, 1 with cream and sugar." "Yes, Madam Chairwoman." Elena walked into her office, the vast, light-filled space, and stood by the window, her back to the door. She heard it open. She heard the soft, hesitant footsteps. "Hello, Seraphina." She turned. The woman standing in the middle of her Persian rug was a wraith. The brilliant blonde hair was now a dull, brassy color, tied back in a knot. The radiant confidence was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed desperation. She was thin, her jeans and faded sweater hanging off her. She was clutching a worn-out handbag as if it were a life raft. Claire entered, placed the 2 coffees on the table, and left, the door clicking shut. You look good, Elena," Seraphina whispered. Her voice was raw. "You did not come here to compliment me." "You have 4 minutes," Elena said, her voice not unkind, but firm. Seraphina flinched. She looked at the coffee. "You remembered. Cream and sugar. You ordered it at every dinner. What do you want?" Tears immediately welled in Seraphina's eyes, and she scrubbed them away angrily. I'm not here to ask for money. I know you won't give me any, and I'm not here to apologize for him. I was stupid. I know that. I believed him. I believed I was the next one, the one who was different." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "He bankrupted me. The second the board voted, he drained that offshore account you found. He told me it was for his legal fees, to protect us. Then he disappeared. The press, the lawyers, they're suing me. They say I was a co-conspirator, that I knew about the embezzlement." "Did you?" Elena asked, her gaze steady. I knew he was putting money aside," Seraphina admitted, her voice dropping. I thought it was what rich people did. I didn't know it was fraud. I didn't know it was your money. He told me you were just a wife, that the money was all his." "And you believed him," Elena stated. "It wasn't a question." "I want to testify," Seraphina said, her voice suddenly gaining a small, sharp edge of the woman she used to be. "I want to help you. I want to tell the SEC everything. Every dinner, every conversation, everything he said about the board, about the Legacy Tower, about you. I want to see him in jail." Elena walked to her desk and sat down. She looked at this young woman, who had been both her rival and, in the end, her catalyst. She saw the pathetic, desperate need for revenge. It was a poison Elena herself had tasted, and, thankfully, spit out. "No," Elena said. Serafina stared. "What? But I can help you. I can bury him." "Richard is already buried," Elena said, her voice quiet. "He is a 50-year-old man with no assets, no reputation, and multiple federal investigations against him. He is pathetic. Your testimony would be piling dirt on a coffin that is already sealed. It would only serve your own need for revenge, and in doing so, it would tie you to him, legally and publicly, for the rest of your life. You would be Richard Davenport's mistress forever." Serafina's face crumpled. "But what do I do? I have nothing. I'm waiting tables at a diner in Queens. I'm nothing." Eleanor picked up her phone. "Alistair, I'm sending a young woman down to your office. Her name is Serafina Sinclair. Yes, that one. I want you to connect her with a lawyer. A good one. Not one of ours, a private attorney. Bill it to my personal account." "No, Alistair, she is not a threat. She is a loose end." "Yes, thank you." She hung up and looked at Serafina, who was crying silently into her hands. "You will go to Alistair's office. He will provide you with counsel. This lawyer will negotiate a non-prosecution agreement with the SEC in exchange for your testimony. You will not be a co-conspirator. You will be a witness. The Thornton Group will also, in exchange for your full and final testimony, agree not to pursue civil charges for the $3 million he gave you." Serafina looked up, her face a mask of disbelief. Why? Why would you do this for me?" "I am not doing this for you, Miss Sinclair," Elena said, standing. The meeting was over. "I am doing this for me. You were a symptom of his disease, not the cause. I am cleaning my house. Your public ruin does nothing for my brand. Your quiet, new life, however, is a very tidy piece of business." She walked to the door and opened it. "Your lawyer will require you to sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. If you ever speak of me, of Richard, or of this company to anyone, ever again, I will deploy my resources to ensure you are held financially liable for every single dollar he stole in your name. Do you understand?" Serafina, shaking, stood up. She understood power. She had just seen for the first time what it truly looked like. It wasn't a public kiss. It was a quiet, checkmated move. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, thank you." She left. Elena watched her go, then turned to Claire. "Have the office deep cleaned, please, and cancel my 11 a.m. with Alistair. It seems we've already concluded our business." That evening, the New York Public Library was lit in a soft, warm gold. This was the inaugural dinner for the Thornton Foundation. It was not a gala. There were no flashing bulbs, no red carpet. The guests were a mix. Genevieve Beaumont sat next to the Dean of Engineering from Cooper Union, and Julian Vanderbilt was in a deep discussion with a 19-year-old art student from the Bronx, the Foundation's first scholarship recipient. Elena stood at the podium. She was wearing a midnight blue sheath dress. No emeralds, no diamonds, just her mother's simple pearl earrings. "My father, Arthur Thornton," she began, her voice steady and warm, filling the Astor Hall, "used to say that legacy wasn't what you built. It was what you left. For years I misunderstood him. I thought he meant the steel, the stock, the company, the assets." She smiled, a genuine, easy smile. But he didn't. He meant the impact. A building can be torn down, a stock can fall, but an idea, an opportunity, that is a blueprint that can be used forever. The Thornton Foundation isn't here to build monuments to ourselves. We are here to invest in architects, the architects of our future. She spoke for 10 minutes, her speech flowing not from a script, but from a place of deep, settled conviction. When she finished, the applause was not the polite, scattered claps of a society event. It was deep, sustained, and real. Later, Harrison found her standing alone, looking at the ceiling of the reading room. "That was a hell of a speech, boss," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "I meant every word," she said, taking it. "I know." He clinked his glass against hers. "I've been thinking about what to say to you. I worked for your father for 30 years. He was a brilliant man, a good man, but he was cautious. He built walls to protect his legacy. He was afraid of the world." He looked at her, his eyes shining. "You, Elena, you're not afraid. You're tearing down the walls and building bridges. He would be so damn proud of you." Elena felt a warmth in her chest, an old, cold tightness finally unspooling. She looked out over the room, the mix of old money and new ideas, the energy, the potential. Richard had tried to steal her company. He had tried to steal her name. But he had, in his blind arrogance, given her the one thing she never knew she was missing, her voice. This wasn't a new chapter. It wasn't revenge. It was resurrection. And Eleanor Thornton, the architect of her own life, was finally, truly, ready to build. The story of Elena Davenport is a brutal, shocking, and ultimately empowering reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. She didn't just reclaim her life, she reclaimed her name, her legacy, and her identity. But what do you think? Was Eleanor's decade of silence a necessary protection or a mistake that allowed a monster to grow? What would you have done if you were in her shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This kind of drama, a story of betrayal and unbelievable revenge, is happening in real life every day, hidden behind closed doors. If you were captivated by Elena's journey from a silent wife to a titan of industry, please don't forget to hit that like button. It truly helps the channel. Share this video with anyone who loves a story of justice being served, and most importantly, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next story we uncover.